Welcome to another conversational power episode. Today, I believe that everyone around the world, they wake up with very significant development around the world. With United States, President Donald Trump announced that the United States striked the Venezuela, and even they taking the President Maduro with his wife, taking out from Venezuela to the United States, possibly for trial. And United States Air Force strike many places around Venezuela, including some logistic and air bases. And now, of course, this development will not be limited to the Latin American countries, which Venezuela is a largest oil reserve, one of the country around the world, and has good relations with some U.S. rivals like China, Iran, North Korea, and that is why this development will significantly affect the most critical part of the world, such as the Persian Gulf, the developments in the Red Sea and in South China Sea around Taiwan. To understand all these complex issues, I have my guest, Dr. Jochen Kainsmith. He's a lecturer and research associate at the Chair of International Politics at TU Dresden. Previously, he has worked at the Catholic University of Eichstätt, Ingolstadt, Center for Latin America Studies, ZILUS, also at the Universidad del Rosario in Bogota, Colombia, and at Universidad EAFIT at Medellin, Colombia, and at the University of the German Armed Forces in Munich, Germany. He has also served as a visiting fellow of NATO School of Oberammergau, Germany, as well as a guest lecturer at the Escuela Superior de Guerra in Bogota, Colombia, and at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany. And Dr. Jochen, thank you very much for joining me, and I apologize for any pronunciation because the name of universities as in Spanish or Portugal, it's difficult to pronounce things for me.
Absolutely no worries. Thanks for having me.
And Doctor, as I mentioned, we wake up with a serious development taking place in Latin America. And you, of course, you have rich experience. You have been in the region, including Colombia, Latin America. Based on these developments and your experience, how do you see such kinetic enforcement of the kind of the Monroe Doctrine place regional powers like Brazil and Mexico in a strategic dilemma? And do you anticipate that a pragmatic accommodation or a deep diplomatic fracture within the organization of the Latin America states will appear?
That's a very good question. I think regarding the reactions, everything right now points to a pragmatic reaction, given that, according to recent polls, a small majority of Latin Americans appear to support such an intervention. So this is not really something that divides the United States from Latin America, but this operation will polarize the public opinions within both the US and Latin America, roughly following a right-left divide, with the right supporting the intervention both in the US and in Latin America, the left being against, and centrist and liberal forces, where they still exist, will probably be divided. So there is a certain political impact here, but probably less of an impact in terms of US-Latin American international relations.
And does this intervention signal a systemic return to active enforcements in Washington's near abroad or Western Hemisphere, effectively operationalizing a Trump corollary that overrides previous areas that passive containment we were talking about?
Yes, it might. However, we should also understand that this operation is smaller in scope, really, than previous interventions, for example, in Panama in 1989, because what we saw in Panama was an actual regime change. General Noriega was taken out, was tried and arrested, but there was also a wider shift towards democratic governance in Panama. This is something that has not yet happened in Venezuela. And according to announcements by Marco Rubio, we might not be seeing further operations. So what we're seeing right now is the transnational arrest, if you want to call it that, of the head of state of Venezuela, which is, of course, quite an event and certainly very problematic under international law, but it is not yet regime change. And considering how good the Venezuelan regime was at the personal security of the president and other power holders, it is now being speculated that Maduro might have been given up by other parts of his government in order to safeguard their continued grip on power in Venezuela. It appears that the Minister of Defense and the Foreign Minister and other officials are secure, are able to make announcements within Venezuela. So it does not appear that this operation has wider aims. It might not yet signal a return to democracy in Venezuela.
And Beijing and Moscow have long cultivated Venezuela as a strategic beachhead. Does their inability to prevent these extractions expose the limits of the external security guarantees to Venezuela? And could this also trigger asymmetric escalation in Eastern Europe or South China Sea or maybe in the Korean Peninsula? What will be your observation?
A number of observations here. First, it demonstrates that Russia is not able to offer any sort of security guarantees in Latin America. It does not have any. So what we see now, Russian security guarantees are empty. Russia was not able in the current situation to support their allies in Venezuela in any way. And China might have been able to take some sort of action, but chose not to. So in a way, if we see current world politics as being dominated by a return to spheres of influence, this could be seen as an indicator, of course. It is unlikely that it will really serve as a transformative event in terms of the norm of non-intervention, because we've seen stronger violations of this norm. For example, in Ukraine very recently, where the existence of an entire country was questioned, that was a much stronger violation of the non-intervention norm. And also the intervention in Iraq in 2003 was already a much stronger violation of that norm, because it actually encompassed a massive military operation which resulted in a regime change. So we're looking at something that will have an influence, that will serve as a point of reference in the geopolitical narratives of different actors, but it is not in itself entirely transformative. And to strategic analysts of the region, it doesn't really come as a surprise that Russia and China were toothless tigers in Latin America. They do not have military bases in the region. They do not have material power projection capabilities in the region. Militarily, Latin America was always in the zone of influence of the United States and of the United States only. China has some economic importance in terms of trade, mostly trade, not so much investment actually, and in terms of some development projects, but this is entirely economic influence. This is not undergirded in any way by power projection abilities. It doesn't come as a surprise, but it serves to demonstrate this to the wider public.
And we are discussing a country with the world's largest proven oil reserves potentially coming back online under the US influence. So how do you see police Middle Eastern choke points like the Strait of Hormuz?
One thing that there is to know about Venezuelan crude is that it is extraordinarily heavy and extraordinarily sour. So it is really quite difficult to extract and to convert to a usable form. So this may have an impact further down the line. But Venezuelan crude is quite expensive, so it would really probably come online only with higher crude prices, and then of course have an influence. Right now we do not have very high crude prices, so the short-term influence will probably be minimal. Also, the Venezuelan oil industry, after what is now decades of neglect, would need substantial investment and would have to see the willingness of engineers and other expert personnel to actually move to Venezuela and work there. And if that could be achieved, if there is perhaps a normalization of economic relations with any future regime, then we could see some effect of the re-entry of Venezuelan oil to the market. Right now, this is hypothetical. We will not be seeing this in the short term. This might be a medium-term development.
And from Pyongyang to Tehran, adversarial regimes are witnessing the physical extraction of head of state. In your assessment, does this operation strengthen U.S. deterrence, or does it incentivize these actors to accelerate nuclear breakout capabilities as a survival granted? Because Venezuela is, of course, how this development will affect from the Tehran to the Pyongyang will affect their attitudes.
Perhaps not too much. I mean, Pyongyang already has a nuclear deterrent, which is probably effective to some degree, even against the US. With Tehran, it's a different story. It might actually provide an incentive to accelerate the acquisition of a nuclear deterrent. But then even Tehran in its current state would probably be able to pose a more serious challenge to such a US operation. I don't think that the US would have carried out such an operation in Tehran. It probably depends on information that will be forthcoming, but it will provide both regimes, of course, with another element for their narrative, so to speak. However, what we're probably going to see in Venezuela is some sort of restabilization of the regime, since we're already hearing that there won't be follow-up operations. Under these conditions, the Chavista regime will probably be able to hang on to power, and so the consequences might not be as dramatic.
And as I mentioned, this will be wider effect, maybe not only limited to the North Korea. Even we discussed about the Horn of Africa. And how does this demonstrated operational reach in the Caribbean country will resonate the theaters like the Horn of Africa, Taiwan Strait, and is a signal that Washington's tolerance for gray zone coercion has narrowed significantly?
Not directly, really. I mean, in the Red Sea and in the Horn of Africa area, there have already been many military interventions by different actors without any respect to the sovereignty of countries there. So this just confirms that we're entering an age where norms against intervention, against armed intervention, depend on the capability to actually counteract those interventions and are not sustained by international legal norms anymore. With the Strait of Taiwan, of course, it does not materially change the situation, but it will provide a further argument to Chinese narratives of Taiwan being a part of their territory and great powers intervening militarily within their sphere of influence. But this will be largely a rhetorical effect. I do not see any strategic interaction between the two theaters right now. Of course, it also depends on how this intervention will be framed by the US in the coming hours and days. So if this is used as an occasion to definitely affirm a spheres of influence approach to international politics, then this could have a strong impact on future negotiations between the US and China, between perhaps even the US and Russia, on how to deal with events in the area surrounding those countries. But right now, something has happened that has already happened before, right? And in fact, quite recently, like in 1989 in Panama, even more drastic interventions have happened. So it will be enticing to jump to conclusions right now, but overall, I do not see this as a totally transformative event or some such thing.
We saw that this operation effectively bypassed traditional international legal frameworks. So are we witnessing the consolidation of a sovereignty of capacity where operational reach suppressed the UN Charter?
Yes, of course. This operation is illegal under international law. As such, really, this is almost irrelevant on a global level in comparison to what we've seen Russia doing in Ukraine, which, after all, is an operation designed to actually eradicate the sovereignty of another state. It is also much less grave in terms of its legal impact than the 2003 US invasion in Iraq, which also effected a regime change. You could even argue that this operation is lesser in terms of its international legal impact than Venezuelan actions, for example, using armed bands to exercise influence on Guayanese territory in the Essequibo region. So Venezuela has not been entirely innocent in international legal terms as well. So the fact that the US performed this operation against basically the one country which has used armed groups to exercise influence on other countries' territories within the region sort of limits its normatively transformative impact, I would say. But then again, it depends on how this operation will be framed by the US, by other actors. It is very difficult to make a comprehensive assessment now.
Doctor, drawing lessons from the Iraq and Libya, does the US have a viable roadmap to stabilize Venezuela's hollowed out institutions, or do it risks a security vacuum that exacerbates the migration crisis rather than resolving the situation of the country?
Right now, if the announcements by Secretary Rubio are carried out, then we're not going to see ongoing military operations in Venezuela. In that case, we will not be seeing a transformation of the Venezuelan regime, the political system. Fact is that the Venezuelan state has already been disaggregated to a very large degree under the Maduro government. So any change in government in Caracas, even if it is carried out, would be limited in impact because that government will not have administrative reach to the peripheral areas of the Venezuelan state. And basically, as it is today, armed groups will continue to exercise influence in those areas. And any attempt to actually restore the influence of the Venezuelan central government, be it a government brought into power by outside actors, or be it some successor of Maduro, any such transformation would again need some sort of ongoing, sustained military effort within Venezuela. That's probably not something we will be seeing. So while the human rights situation in Venezuela remains grave, and the humanitarian situation with respect to security, food, public health, and so on remains catastrophic, we're probably not going to see grave changes affecting this.
And going back to the Latin American countries and the structure of the states, how do you see this intervention will impact the trajectory of a socialist movements across Latin America? Do you think that could this accelerate a shift toward centrist governance, or will it galvanize anti-American sentiment among the political bases?
It will probably serve to polarize politics in Latin America even more. There is right now, in most countries at least, a small but significant majority in favor of US intervention in Venezuela. So as I remarked before, this will not drive a wedge between the US and Latin American countries so much, but it will serve to further polarize the politics of both Latin America and the US. And of course, this will be used.
One audience is asking, you mentioned that the regime might have given up Maduro. Who could be the regime's alternative to Maduro?
Oh, yes, and greetings to Michal Broska. Basically, what we're seeing is that helicopters were operating unimpeded over Caracas. We are seeing that apparently Maduro was extricated without any form of large-scale combat. Even for a military power as the US, it would have been very difficult to extricate a head of state with significant regime security in place without really infantry combat, without significant military operations. So it seems that somehow his close protection was neutralized in some way for this operation to be possible. So anybody who would have performed this deal would have to be someone with good connections to the Venezuelan security apparatus. So we might be seeing someone from within Maduro's regime stepping forward to take power under these circumstances. Perhaps Diosdado Cabello, just speculating here, of course, we have no real indicators, but Diosdado Cabello is generally seen as the second in command after Maduro, with a military background himself and with good connections in the governing party and good connections in the intelligence and security services. So him, or a person like him, might be in the position to execute something like this. Whether he will actually step forward to lead Venezuela in the future is an open question. There might also be attempts to form a more consensual government. In that case, we might see Maria Corina Machado, or the current president-elect, entering into some sort of negotiations with the regime. But in the past, those negotiations have tended to just peter out without any resolution of issues, given that any introduction of outside actors would signify the end of the peso monopoly on power in Venezuela. So that would actually constitute a drastic change of the political structure of Venezuela. But if there's already a guarantee from Marco Rubio that no further intervention will be forthcoming, in that case, why give up power for essentially nothing? So I don't yet see this transformative situation that some observers are seeing.
There is another. So if Russia was laundering its oil via Venezuela, was this basically a black sanction operation or really a drug operation or both?
Well, in terms of drugs, Venezuela is an important transport corridor, mostly for Colombian cocaine, but most of that is actually going to Europe and might be going through the Middle East and other channels via Venezuela's cooperation with Iran, might also be entering Europe via Venezuela's cooperation with Russia. But it will not really affect drug flows towards the US in any significant way. So also here, there is more spectacle than structural effect. And if there are no follow-up operations within the country, then overall the effect will be quite limited. And yes, of course, Russia is cooperating with Venezuela on illicit financial flows in a variety of ways, also with regards to the black oil market, so to speak. But again, it is not clear how this operation will affect those processes. If US forces continue to target, for example, oil shipping or shipping infrastructure, as we have been seeing already over the previous weeks, then this might actually affect those, might affect that cooperation. But it's too early to tell whether this arrest of Maduro will actually be significant in any way.
And Dr. Joachim, just as a final question, I didn't have opportunity to read the full statement of Rubio, but if there is no further operation or strike on the Venezuelan soils, so what was the purpose of this operation? Only taking the Maduro to the America, or and also there is no strong combat resistance.
Exactly. What is the purpose? It might just turn out to be a spectacle for the audience of Donald Trump, who will get spectacular pictures, who will get perhaps a trial of Maduro in a US court. So there will be some media spectacle for both friends and opponents of Donald Trump, but not really any material change to the power structures in place in Venezuela. That is probably the most likely development right now. Interesting, right? It's the thing is that Trump himself does not really have a coherent strategy for this or for any other scenario. There are groups around him connected to Trump who do have coherent strategies, and one of those groups would be the one with which Marco Rubio is associated, which would like to see more US influence, more US interventions perhaps in the hemisphere, in the American hemisphere, but not necessarily outside of it. But there are other groups. There are, of course, isolationist tendencies. There are certain groups who appear to be prosecuting only financial interests. So this operation seems to represent something like a compromise between different groups in which Marco Rubio and the hemispherist sector in US foreign policy, so to speak, get an operation that targets a US opponent in their hemisphere, but on the other hand, a very limited operation, one that is so limited that it is really more of a spectacle and does not lead to, probably will not lead to any long-term changes in the Venezuelan power structure, even though, of course, there will be adjustments within Venezuela, within the power structure in the regime, given the absence of the president. But given how light resistance to this was and how the president did not manage to evade capture and all of this, it does appear that this might have been prearranged, that Maduro might have been given up by the power structure. And in that case, we can assume that his successors will already have arranged the future distribution of power. We might yet see other developments that bring about change in Venezuela, but this alone, with no follow-up operations, I do not really see this effecting regime change. After all, we're looking at a government that has had more than a dozen years to solidify itself as a successor to Hugo Chavez's government. We're overall looking at more than a quarter of a century of Chavista power in Venezuela, and regime security is something that has generally been prioritized here. The armed forces are thoroughly coup-proofed. There are informal networks in place, informal networks also with armed groups such as the colectivos, such as local militias in the mining arc of southern Venezuela, such as Colombian guerrilla groups in the frontier areas with Colombia. So we might still be seeing a stable Chavista regime in Venezuela after the departure of Maduro. And if they can readjust their power structure accordingly, that may still stay stable.
Right now, the development still is ongoing. Even we don't know Maduro will be bring to the United States or other part of the world. We don't know. Do you have any expectation where will Maduro will go, or where the US troops bring him to for trial or for prison? What will be?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have any idea really what would await him in a US court, which might, after all, decide that the way in which he was brought to the United States does not meet any legal standards. I am really unable to give any legal judgment here, but I do expect that legal commentators will have some very interesting information about this. So yes, Maduro has been caught. There may be alternatives to judging him in the United States. He might be handled in the same way that Taliban combatants, for example, were handled. Might be brought to Guantanamo Bay or something like that. Certainly, Trump already said during his first time in office that he would fill up Guantanamo Bay with bad guys. So perhaps this will be an opportunity to do this. It is really too early to tell. It seems that, like much of Trump's foreign policy, this was an improvised action without any long-term planning behind it, with obviously certain groups in Trump's orbit trying to pull him in different directions. And this very much looks like a compromise was reached between isolationists and hemispheric interventionists. So we will see where the power struggle around Trump takes this situation next. Almost certainly it will not be a well-planned affair. So we might yet see some surprising events here.
And thank you very much, Dr. Joachim, for this rich experience and kindly accepting my invitation to join this breaking live stream. No, so big apologize for these technical issues. This is beyond my capability. And let us see what will happen in the next stage of this development. I believe that it will affect the many part of the world, but still we have to wait and see what will going on. Thank you very much again, Dr. Joachim, for joining me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you. Thank you also for audiences, and apologize for these technical issues I experienced during the show. Please subscribe our channel and waiting for our upcoming live streams about the critical development around the world.